Put this on your kitchen calendar. In about 4 months' time, you're going to be asked a big question. Are we in or are we out? Shall we stay? Shall we go? Yes, prepare yourself. You're going to hear an awful lot of debate over the coming months about Europe.
Debate or scare stories.
Yeah.
The papers are full of them at the moment. It's just, panic if we get out. If we stay, it's going to be a nightmare.
And how has David Cameron not gone grey? It's crunch time for him. He's making his last efforts to get the reforms he wants. All them late nights, all them long meetings. He's meeting leaders of other EU countries to talk about his wish list. Our political correspondent Rob Watson is in Brussels.
David Cameron's European dream would no doubt be for the other 27 leaders to all line up and say, Dave, we love you in the UK and want you to stay. So, hey, just do your own thing. Rewrite all those treaties. Whatever you need. Of course, that's not quite going to happen. But what Mr. Cameron does need is something he can take back to the British people and say, look, I promised you action on 4 things that bother us Brits, and I've got it. So, 1, he needs something that makes it clear that Britain will never be joining a United States of Europe-style ever closer union. 2, something that shows it will be allowed to try to limit immigration by making Britain a less attractive place to workers from other EU countries. 3, a guarantee the UK won't face discrimination for keeping the pound instead of joining the euro. And 4th and finally, a promise to make the EU less, bureaucratic.
Well, that summit coincides with a survey today which suggests that the majority of businesses in the North East actually want to stay in the EU. The North East Chamber of Commerce found that 63% of those it spoke to wanted to remain part of Europe.
29% would vote to leave and 8% still not sure. Richard Swart is MD of manufacturing group Berger Europe and chairman of North East Chamber of Commerce International Trade Committee. In a second we'll also speak to Jonathan Arnott from UKIP, MEP for the North East. So first of all, Richard, it seems the majority of businesses support staying in the EU. Are you surprised, and why?
I'm not at all surprised. This has been the position in principle, certainly over the last 12 to 18 months. And what was interesting with this one is it actually shows a few percentage points higher supporting in than the position several months ago. And the reason is regardless of the Prime Minister's success today or tomorrow in Europe, the advantages of Europe far outweigh the disadvantages in its current form. These are businesses that you are saying that we must stay in and are not dependent on the Prime Minister's reforms. And the reason is, as I said, the advantages are huge. 49% of our global trade of goods and services, worth more than £519 billion, is with the EU. Then you have Asia at 19% and the Americas at 17%.
Okay.
We must also, and another important point, people often talk about developing links with India and China and so on. It's hugely important, and of course we must do that, but we must realize that we export more to Ireland than we do to India and China combined.
To Ireland.
So the EU market is by far our biggest market, and our best interests are served by nurturing and developing the links with the EU. And of course, that's not to say that on things that need changing.
Let's bring in Jonathan Arnott quickly, because I want to do a bit of to and fro here. Jonathan, there we have a strong argument from a man who's heavily involved in business about North East businesses being worried about this.
Well, of course, if we leave the European Union, we're not going to stop exporting to the European Union. We're not going to stop trading with the European Union. You look at a country like Switzerland, for example, and Switzerland does 4.5 times more trade per capita with the European Union than we do in the UK. Look, we're shackled to a European Union whose share of world GDP is declining year on year. It's gone from 24% in the 80s to 17% today. It'll be under 15% just 3 years from now. We're shackled to this declining club, and actually we need to look not just at trade with our neighbours, but also with developing trade with those non-EU countries, which are going to be the emerging markets in years to come. Let's look at the future, not the 1950s.
Huge uncertainty if we do leave, though.
Well, listen, there is always uncertainty with any decision that is ever taken. And I think what we've seen is there's been such scaremongering. You only have to look at companies like Nissan and Hitachi that have been very, very clear. They're staying in the UK whether we leave the EU or not. But we've seen the Labour Party and others who've whipped up this absolute hysteria about those companies. I think some have started to believe that scaremongering.
Okay.
And I think that's why we've got to make a positive case about how this country would be better outside the European Union.
Okay, final word to you, Jonathan. If we do leave the EU, is this the land of milk and honey? Is this we've got everything in our own control?
Well, let's remember, for example, that tiny Iceland outside the European Union has managed to negotiate a free trade deal with China. We haven't. So being outside the EU actually gives us a chance to negotiate more free trade deals. Switzerland has more free trade deals with countries across the globe than we do. They're not in the European Union. So it's very, very easy to negotiate those deals. And as for Nissan, Paul Wilcox, chairman of Nissan Europe, was asked 5 times on the Today programme. 5 times he was asked, is it a long-term commitment you've got to the UK, whether we leave the EU or not? And 5 times he gave a categorical answer. We're in the European Union that used to account for 62% of our exports in 2006 in the UK. It's gone down to 47% last year. Please, let's not shackle us to this 1950s club. Let's look to the future, and the future is a global economy.
Of course, we've hardly covered any of the issues, but we'll chat about this for months. So thanks for coming on, Jonathan Arnott.